It was a high-profile legal symposium hosted at a historic Ivy League university, where intellectuals, judges, scholars, and public figures gathered to discuss the state of law and justice in modern America. Among the panelists was none other than Chief Justice John Roberts, known for his composed demeanor and sharp legal intellect. But what drew significant attention was the presence of actor Denzel Washington, invited for his advocacy in justice reform and his impactful portrayals of lawyers in film. The audience was filled with curiosity, some skeptical of a celebrity sharing space with legal titans. As the panel began, the tone was respectful, but the dynamic shifted when Roberts decided to address Denzel directly, with what many perceived as an attempt to challenge his credibility. He asked, "Mr. Washington, your portrayals are compelling, but do you feel they add any real legal value to the discourse?" The room hushed. It was a pointed question, framed in civility, but clearly loaded. Denzel, calm and unshaken, leaned into the microphone with a poised smile and replied, "Chief Justice, I don't pretend to be a legal authority, but I do believe that honest storytelling can illuminate justice in ways that statutes alone cannot." The silence was replaced by murmurs of interest. The stage was set. Denzel continued his answer, elaborating on how he prepared for roles by immersing himself in real legal cases, spending time with attorneys and understanding not just the laws, but their real-world implications. "My work," he said, "isn't about pretending. It's about reflecting the lived experiences of people who navigate the legal system every day." Roberts responded, perhaps defensively, "Reflection is important, but there's a reason we don't let actors write laws or deliver judgments." A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the audience. Denzel didn't flinch. "And there's a reason storytellers have shaped society since the beginning of civilization," he replied smoothly. "We might not write laws, but we inspire those who enforce and interpret them to see beyond the page." The comment landed hard, not as a retort but as a respectful assertion. It was clear Denzel wasn't there to debate legal jargon, but to contribute perspective here, and he was doing it brilliantly. The moderator shifted topics, but Roberts returned to Denzel later with another critical question. He asked, "Do you worry that dramatizing courtroom scenes gives the public a false sense of how the legal system works?" Denzel nodded thoughtfully. "Absolutely," he admitted. "Drama simplifies. It has to. But that's also an opportunity to show what should be, not just what is. Sometimes films spark the conversations the courtroom avoids." The audience leaned in. Roberts, sensing he hadn't shaken Denzel's confidence, pressed again. "But should the court of public opinion be influenced by fiction?" Denzel's response was immediate. "I don't think people confuse fiction with reality. I think they recognize injustice when they feel it, whether through a movie or through their own lives." It was a nuanced, powerful response. The tension in the room wasn't of hostility but of challenge met with equal measure. Denzel was holding his ground with dignity. At that point, some in the audience began to re-evaluate their initial doubts. Denzel wasn't posturing. He wasn't merely an actor speaking on issues he didn't understand. His words were measured, his points grounded, his perspective deeply human. He spoke about wrongful convictions, about systemic inequalities, and how his advocacy had grown from his work in film into real-world activism. He detailed how proceeds from one of his films were used to fund legal defense programs for the underserved. Even Roberts seemed to be absorbing more than preparing his next challenge. Denzel told a story of meeting a young man imprisoned for years before being exonerated. "He told me it wasn't the law that saved him," Denzel said. "It was someone caring enough to look again. That's what justice should be, relentless care for the truth." The room was utterly still. Denzel hadn't just earned their attention, he had earned their respect. Roberts, no stranger to intellectual sparring, took a different approach in his next engagement. He shifted from criticism to curiosity. "Mr. Washington, You mentioned systemic injustice. What specific legal reforms do you believe we need today? It was a signal subtle but relevant that he now considered Denzel's views worthy of serious engagement. Denzel leaned forward and spoke without notes. We need mandatory retrial reviews for cases involving recanted testimony. We need to close the gap in legal representation between the wealthy and the poor. We need transparency in plea bargains. His answers weren't abstract. They were concrete, actionable. Roberts nodded slowly, visibly surprised. That's more detailed than many legal briefs I've read, he admitted, drawing a laugh from the audience. The tone had shifted. What began as skepticism was evolving into admiration. The actor had revealed himself as an intellectual force. Denzel didn't gloat or overplay the moment. Instead, he pivoted to humility. I didn't learn these things from books alone, he said. I learned them from sitting with grieving mothers, from speaking to public defenders buried in caseloads, from listening. It was a moment of raw honesty that cut deeper than any legal argument. The audience, including seasoned attorneys, sat quietly, reflecting. Roberts offered a brief smile, acknowledging the depth of the comment. Listening, he repeated. That's something our system could use more of. It was the first real concession, and the audience recognized it. This wasn't a debate anymore. It had become a dialogue, a rare space where status and title faded and the merit of ideas took center stage. Denzel had crossed the threshold from invited guest to valued voice. During a Q&A session, a law student asked, Mr. Washington, if you were given the power to argue one case before the Supreme Court, what would it be? Without pause, Denzel answered, I'd argue against qualified immunity. I'd make the case that accountability is the cornerstone of trust in law enforcement. The answer was met with applause, but more tellingly, with a thoughtful silence from Roberts. It was clear the topic was contentious, but Denzel didn't shy away. No system is above the people it serves, he continued. When power is unchecked, it corrodes. When it is accountable, it grows strong. Roberts offered no rebuttal, just a nod. It was a moment of tacit agreement, one that might have seemed impossible an hour earlier. As the event neared its conclusion, the moderator asked each panelist to summarize what justice meant to them in one sentence. Roberts gave a classic answer about the Constitution and fairness. Denzel paused, then said, Justice is what remains when truth and mercy walk into the courtroom together. The room erupted in applause. The line was poetic, yet profoundly meaningful. It captured the very essence of what the law often misses: the human heart. Even Roberts clapped, genuinely and without reservation. It was a symbolic moment. The Chief Justice and the actor had met at an intellectual crossroads and found unexpected common ground. Later, in private interviews, several attendees admitted they had come skeptical of Denzel's role on the panel. But they left inspired, calling his insights fresh, brilliant, and necessary. Even a senior appellate judge in attendance reportedly told colleagues, he speaks with the clarity of someone who has lived in justice, not just studied it. Backstage, Roberts and Denzel shared a quiet exchange. While the microphones were off, the respect between them was palpable. Roberts reportedly told Denzel, You've given me much to think about. Denzel replied, That's all I ever hope for. It was simple, sincere, and left an impression deeper than any headline. Over the next few weeks, clips from the event went viral online. Social media exploded with praise for Denzel's composure and eloquence. Legal forums debated the impact of his words. Young lawyers posted quotes from his speech. Law schools began referencing the symposium in classes about communication and reform. It wasn't just celebrity effect, it was intellectual resonance. One law professor said, Denzel did something rare. He didn't just perform, he persuaded. The moment had transcended the auditorium. It had sparked a broader conversation about who deserves to speak in spaces dominated by traditional gatekeepers. Roberts, known for avoiding the media, surprised many by later referencing the event in a commencement speech. Sometimes wisdom comes from outside the courtroom, he said. Sometimes it comes from people who tell our stories, not just write our laws. It was subtle, but powerful. A Chief Justice acknowledging that truth isn't confined to legal circles. Denzel's impact had reached the highest levels, not through confrontation, but through conviction and grace. He had shown that credibility isn't granted by title, it's earned through integrity. The story didn't fade quickly. It was featured in legal journals, news op-eds, and documentaries. But Denzel remained grounded. He continued his advocacy quietly, without chasing the spotlight. When asked by a journalist if he felt vindicated, he simply said, "I wasn't there to win. I was there to represent voices that don't get invited to those tables." That answer encapsulated his approach not of ego, but of purpose. It wasn't about proving Roberts wrong. It was about proving that every voice matters when justice is the goal. In years to come, that single panel discussion would be remembered not as a clash, but as a convergence. A moment when power and principle met and chose to listen. A moment where humility triumphed over pride. And in that moment, Denzel Washington reminded the world that brilliance isn't limited to courtrooms or degrees, it lives in courage, empathy, and their willingness to speak when others might stay silent. When reflecting on the event later in his memoir, Roberts mentioned it as a turning point in how he viewed public discourse. "Sometimes, those we think are speaking from the outside," he wrote, "are actually holding up a mirror to what we've become." It was a rare admission, one that signaled growth. Meanwhile, Denzel continued his work, never announcing his efforts, but always showing up when needed. He knew that real change didn't come from panels or applause, but from persistence. That day, Denzel didn't just defend his place here, he elevated the conversation. He spoke not just with intellect, but with soul. And in doing so, he achieved something remarkable. He turned a moment of attempted embarrassment into a masterclass on dignity and insight. The judge may have started the conversation with skepticism, but he ended it with admiration. That shift, silent and sincere, was the true victory. People who watched the full exchange came away not with a sense of competition, but with hope. Hope that in a polarized world, people of different backgrounds and roles can come together to understand each other. Hope that respect can still thrive in disagreement. Hope that truth, when spoken from the heart, resonates far beyond titles and robes. And in that hope, the legacy of that day endures. So while the headlines may have highlighted the drama of a judge versus an actor, the deeper story was about unity through discourse. Denzel Washington didn't just impress a Chief Justice here, he inspired a generation. And in doing so, he reminded us all that brilliance isn't in the title we carry, but in the truth we are willing to speak. Idea based on a different title.